Welcome to The Explainer, where we take big, complicated stories and break them down slide by slide.
So here's a question for you. How do you turn an entire nation into capitalists? Like, overnight? After 40 years of communism, this wasn't some thought experiment for Czechoslovakia in 1989. No, this was a full-blown crisis. A crisis that led to one of the most audacious and ultimately disastrous economic experiments in modern history. And it all kicked off with an economy that was right on the verge of total collapse. So, to really get a handle on the radical plan they came up with, you first got to understand the economic, wasteland that the Velvet Revolution inherited. I mean, the country was just on the brink. Yeah, this number pretty much says it all. 1.2%. In 1989, that's how much of the entire labor force worked in the private sector. Think about that. The state owned literally everything, from the massive steel factories right down to the little corner store where you'd go to buy bread. There was basically no private capital, and you had an entire population with zero experience of how a market economy even works.
And it wasn't just that the economy was state-controlled. It was in an absolute nosedive. I mean, just look at these numbers. A 14% drop in a single year. This so-called transformational recession put this insane pressure on the new government. They had to do something big, something dramatic, and they had to do it fast before the whole system just came crashing down.
So what was their solution? Well, it was something completely unprecedented, a program they called voucher privatization. And the goal here was wild: give every single citizen a piece of the pie and create a nation of shareholders almost instantly.
And you know, on paper, it all sounded pretty simple. For a small fee, we're talking about a third of an average month's salary, any citizen could get this voucher book. Inside, 1,000 investment points. You could then use these points to bid for shares in all those state-owned companies. The whole plan was to create millions of new capitalists, fast, without them needing any actual capital. Pretty ingenious, right?
Right. And this quote, this just perfectly sums up the whole philosophy behind the program, especially from its champion, Finance Minister Václav Klaus. Speed was everything. The thinking was if they went slow and careful, the old communist bigwigs would sabotage the whole thing. So they made this really fateful choice. They decided to prioritize speed over legality. And in doing so, they created this huge, dangerous regulatory vacuum.
And that vacuum, that total lack of rules, well, it was exploited immediately, ruthlessly, but not by the millions of new citizen investors they were hoping for. Oh no, it was exploited by a whole new breed of financial predator who saw the opportunity of a lifetime.
You know, the government had this vision of millions of everyday people sitting around their kitchen tables, poring over company reports. It never happened. Most people were totally confused by the process. They were scared of the risk, so what did they do? A staggering 72% of them just handed their vouchers over to these brand new investment privatization funds, or IPFs. And that one move, it changed everything. It concentrated an unbelievable amount of economic power into the hands of just a few hundred unregulated fund managers. So now you've got these funds with immense power, no shareholder protections to speak of, and a justice system that was just completely overwhelmed. And in that environment, these new fund managers basically invented a new type of financial crime that would define the entire scandal. It was called tunneling. And believe me, it was every bit as destructive as it sounds.
So how did tunneling work? Well, it took a bunch of different forms, but the goal was always the same. Suck the wealth out of the company you now controlled and move it into your own secret accounts, usually offshore. You could strip its assets, selling them for cheap to your own shell companies. You could force it to take out massive fake loans to your other businesses, or you could just loot it dry, all while leaving the regular folks with a bunch of worthless paper.
And if this whole era had a poster child, it was a guy named Viktor Kožený. He'd soon become known as the Pirate of Prague. He launched this huge, flashy advertising campaign for his so-called Harvard funds. And it was all built on this one incredibly audacious promise: the certainty of a tenfold return. It was a guarantee he could never, ever keep. But it worked. It seduced 800,000 investors.
Okay, so right in the middle of all this chaos, on January 1st, 1993, Czechoslovakia has its velvet divorce. It peacefully splits into two new countries. And the new Czech and Slovak republics, well, they took very different but as it turns out, equally troubled paths to finishing this whole privatization process. And that led to two very distinct kinds of scandal.
Okay, so this is the crucial difference here. The Czechs, they basically doubled down on that flawed voucher model, which just led to even more tunneling. But Slovakia, under the pretty autocratic leader Vladimír Mečiar, they canceled the program entirely. Instead, they pivoted to a system of direct sales. And who did they sell to? Well, to political loyalists, for pennies on the dollar. It was basically state-sponsored crony capitalism, and it got so bad that Slovakia started being called a black hole in Europe. So the damage from all of this, it wasn't just about money, not even close. It was this deep psychological wound that, honestly, continues to shape both of these nations today. The cost was just astronomical.
Just look at this number. $35 billion. That's the estimated cost of the fraud to the Czech economy alone. A colossal sum. And who ended up paying for it? Well, ordinary citizens who lost their investments, and taxpayers who had to bail out the banks that had been looted by these exact same schemes. It was a massive, uncompensated transfer of wealth straight from the public to a tiny new elite.
So what about the pirate of Prague, Viktor Kožený? Well, his story became the ultimate symbol of just getting away with it. You've got this decades-long, totally fruitless pursuit. He was convicted in 2 different countries, yet he used his stolen fortune to fight extradition for years. And today, he remains a free man living it up in his Bahamian compound, reinforcing this belief for so many people that the powerful can always escape justice.
But at the end of the day, this is what really matters. The greatest cost wasn't the money, it was belief. This whole privatization scandal did more than just destroy companies and bank accounts. It completely shattered an entire generation's faith. Faith in the promise of capitalism, faith in the integrity of their brand new democracies. It created this deep, deep legacy of distrust towards both the government and the market that you can still feel to this very day. And really, it leaves you with a pretty heavy question. When a nation's founding economic story is one of betrayal, how long does it take to ever rebuild that trust?